So I have this habit of just kind of going through unplanned lives and just kind of stream and stream. Recently, I had gotten a ping on Discord, one of several communities that I'm on, and there is an individual by the name of Jay Woodwolf. Nice guy. He actually runs his own YouTube channel as well. If you want to check it out, his is Cauldron Brew. And he mentioned I hadn't done a live or a video in a while. It's kind of a good point. I haven't. And I sometimes wonder what sort of content I should be making. Now, in the past, I started making content that I just enjoyed to make. And it's not that I don't enjoy making content anymore. I'm coming to a point now where I've gotten out a lot of the things that I wanted to say in my lives and videos. And I'm kind of now questioning what sort of topics do I want to cover that I think will be helpful for the greater community as a whole. One of the things that I think is very important is video interaction and views. When you spend a lot of time recording, editing, and researching topics to do videos on, you want to know that that's being well received and that is being appreciated by viewers. So when your videos start getting less views and you start getting less interactions, whether that be the YouTube algorithm or maybe just individuals who have seen your content aren't interested, it makes you less interested in producing more content, or at least putting as much time or effort into it. It's one of the reasons I started doing shorts and lives. Is I like the free open format and forum of these lives because people can interact with the chat and we can have a directed conversation around what individuals are interested in. But then there's also the fact that I'm not getting a lot of reach. So what am I doing? What am I doing with my time? I think that's one of the reasons why I haven't put a lot of content out there. The other reason, which is kind of the topic of this live, is source material and authenticity. I've spent many years. I gotta do math now. So when I was younger, and I've told the story before, but when I was younger, I guess I must have been 13, 14, and I started looking into New Age spiritual stuff. And started out with being raised as a Roman Catholic. I had reached out to my local church, and we were required, being raised Catholic, to go to Sunday school, is what we called it. It was basically school that they taught you about Catholicism and spirituality. And one of the things that I started doing as a child, I liked comic books, video games, fantasy, fictional type stuff, and I enjoyed it a lot. So obviously I'm going to try to mimic that, because that's what kids do. You watch Superman and you tie a blanket to your shirt and run around with it as a cape. You do little things as kids. Well, I did that too. So I tried to do healing. I wanted to do magical healing. I always thought healing was fascinating. And it turns out that there's this thing in which there's many names for it, but it's essentially etheric touch or laying on of hands. And turned out that I had a natural knack for it. I was like, okay, cool. I want to research this a little bit more. And I remember speaking with one of the teachers at my Sunday school at my church and mentioning this to them. And to me, it sticks with me after all these years. There's a lot of things I don't remember, bits and spots from the past. I was born in 81, so I'm in my 40s now, 42. So as I was young, we're talking almost 30 years ago, I remember asking about this and I've discovered this thing. What's going on with this? And I remember the Sunday school teacher basically saying, if you are not healing in Jesus' name, you are using the devil's power. That's paraphrasing the best I can, remembering after 30 years. And that was like, no. That doesn't seem right at all. At the time, being a Catholic, I was like, oh, this must be essentially, one way of saying it would be like a gift from God, right? We're blessed with these abilities and natural talents. I still think that there is a blessing from whatever created us. I just don't buy into the Catholic mythology anymore. So I started looking elsewhere back then. And when I started looking back in the early 90s, it must have been, 93 or something like that, I think. Might have to do some math really quick. Get out a calculator program here because it's just, I don't remember. Calculator. What are we in right now? 2024. Let's see. 42 minus 13, about 29 years ago. 2024 minus 29, 95. So okay, so yeah, so early 90s, early to mid 90s. Resources back then were kind of limited to local occult shops and getting books. So one of the big book production companies that produced the type of stuff I wanted to start researching and looking into was called Llewellyn Publications. And I'm not trying to badmouth Llewellyn, but yeah, I don't even know what their criteria is to get a book published through them. But they published a lot of books, a lot. So you go to your local occult shop, you'll talk to other people who are also into this stuff, and you would talk about resources, right? Where do you pick up resources? Half-price books became very popular. I never stopped to question or ask why these books were ending up in half-price books and why people weren't keeping them. But you'd find there was a very big New Age occult section in half-price books. It seems to have shrunk over the years. I remember when I was, like I said, back in the 90s, I remember going to the occult section in half-price books, and I would see, I don't know, like 5 or 6 bookshelves filled with it. Barnes & Nobles was too expensive for most of us, especially when you were young like myself, but as a whole, it was very popular to go to these sections. And I remember talking with people in these local bookshops where you could also buy stuff from. Sometimes they'd get it secondhand as well. I ran across an online ordering place called Azure Green, which is still in business. Still a great place to shop if you're looking for occult book and supplies. But the thing that I never stopped to ask myself, which I don't think a lot of people did, was how do we know these authors know what they're talking about? How do we know there's any authenticity to the information that they're sharing? What makes them an expert? Where do they learn from? And I never asked myself that. For years, I spent time reading these books. I remember going through them, and then I started noticing a trend in many of them where reprinting similar stuff. And they would make claims and references to the history of origin on stuff, and they would never be able to back it up with proof, you know. This is where it all started, and this is how old it is, and this is how ancient it is. But it's like, okay, so where did you get that information from? Recently, I started, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago. I don't know how long it's been now. Roughly 2 years ago, I started getting on TikTok. I started talking to an individual on there, historical heathen, pretty nice guy. He was big on sources, very big on resources. So any of the conversation that he has when he shares information or he talks to other people, he talks about the source of where it's coming from. And I remember discussing with him, and I had done so with others in the past as well, talking about where are they getting their information from. A lot of people in the New Age polytheistic community have a tendency to collect information and repeat it, regurgitate it. This is a common theme of my videos and my shorts for the last 2 years at least, has been talking about sources. And this is why it's such a big deal to me, because you spend years, 29 years, I've looked through different books, which, by the way, I had a viewer once request a tour of my library. Well, I dusted off my bookshelves and I'm reorganizing them, and I think it's about time that I finally do a tour of my, I guess, occult library is what you could call it. I mean, it's a very modest occult library. Not much of a library. It's more like 3 or 4 bookshelves of a whole bunch of different books. Some of the sources are good, authentic sources, and some of them are questionable. Like I'm talking about some of the stuff from Llewellyn and things, some of these publishers that are printing a lot of the same information. So I started talking with Historical Heathen about sources, and it was a really good, solid thing. We went back and forth on different debates and discussions. And I remember having similar debates with people in the past, because a lot of people collect information, they regurgitate it, and they don't know where it came from. It's just, well, it's just known. It's just what, you know, the stuff's from the dawn of time. We have records to prove that, or are we just making that claim? Oh, well, this comes from this source. So I've been digging the last 2 or 3 years. This has been a recent thing, and trying to find out, well, where did this come from? I mean, I can repeat a lot of the same things that are repeated in the pagan, New Age, polytheistic communities, and I could talk about where they're saying stuff's coming from. You know, we can talk about circle casting or doing rituals or spells, or why you use wands or elemental tools. We can talk about protections and wardings, cleansings. We can talk about psychic healing or psychic investigation. We can talk about tapping into all of these different abilities and powers, which are natural, divine given gifts to humankind. But where does it come from? How do we know? Who discovered it? And once I started digging down that path, I started making a lot of discoveries, and it made me realize I don't think any of us who have been in this stuff for the last 30 years know any of that. We just repeat what some of the big names, the big book authors, like when people start talking about some of these practices, they will reference books and authors that everyone pretty much had read, you know. We have some big names individuals, and I think that's why a lot of people were calling themselves witches back in the 90s, because that was the witch boom, right? Everyone wanted to be a witch because they all wanted powers. They all wanted magic. They all wanted to tap into the raw elements of nature. And it's like, okay, no big deal. But I started collecting names from some of the authors that you might have heard of, right? And I tried to categorize them, and you know, where did it come from, and who are some of the people. So some of the individuals that you may have heard of, you know, Gerald Gardner, Dorothy Clutterbuck, Alex Sanders, Doreen Valentine, Margaret Murray, Z Budapest, Sybil Leek, Laurie Cabot, Scott Cunningham, Raymond Buckland, Carolyn Correll. So like some of these big names, and there was other ones too. There's like Silver Raven Wolf, and there's Constantinius. There's what was his name? Probably should grab his name. Ted Andrews? Is that it? I'm like looking at my bookshelf right now, see if I can grab one of his books that I know he wrote the Healer's Manual, which I'm a huge fan of. Let me check the name. Yeah, it's Ted Andrews. Ed Fitch. Who's Isaac Bonowitz? Ross Nichols. I never know how to say it. Aleister Crowley. I don't know if it's Aleister or Alistair, and I don't know if it's Crowley or Crowley. I've heard both pronunciations. But, you know, these are some of the big names. So when people get into this stuff, they will pick up books, and they will learn from these books, and they will repeat the things they learned in these books. And in many cases, a lot of these books repeat the same information. But again, what makes these people experts? These are just well-known authors. But a lot of what has been defined in today's New Age heathen movements, heathen, pagan, any of the movements, is largely based around just a handful of authors. And people won't reference it. They won't say that, you know, this is the author I learned from, this is the book I read. You know, they'll just say it as if it's fact, and they'll argue it till they're blue in the face that this is fact, or this is how it is. This is just, it's known. It's not known. You learned it. You learned it from somewhere. So if you're trying to help out someone who's brand new, or if you want to have a debate or a discussion with people who also practice, bring your sources. It's not that hard. And that's one of the problems that I'm facing now too, is that as I start to research and investigate this stuff, I'm once again having to turn to sources. So by saying that some of this stuff and material is not authentic, some of it is, but some of the stuff that I'm saying is not authentic, I'm relying on sources. So back in the 90s, I really heavily relied on books. What book sounded like it had a neat title? What author many of us had read and trust? Oh, we know this author. They write good material. Why? Because everybody talks about it. Well, it's not necessarily enough. So then I started getting on the internet. So now here in, you know, the 2020s, mid 2000s, I'm starting to dig into online resources and, get on the forums, watch other content creators, talk with people in Discord or different communities, TikTok, responses here on YouTube to some of my videos, and doing internet searches, a lot of internet searches, and then trying to confirm those internet searches. When you find a source, if you find it on like WikiWand, I like to use that a lot, but I want to follow it up. Who's saying this about what author and why? How do we know this author is trustworthy? Trying to find content creators that do similar stuff to what I'm attempting to do and use them as sources of truth of, is the source material good or bad? So then I started stumbling onto stuff like Jackson Crawford when it comes to some of the heathen reconstruction stuff. Now, I'm not saying Crawford's a heathen, but he's a linguist who has studied the language and has done translations. So to me, having a doctorate, I think that makes them a pretty authentic source. Then I run across people like Ronald Hutton. So Professor Ronald Hutton is, when we talk about some of the, I guess, more of the European pagan revival reconstruction stuff. So anything dealing with like the Celtic or Anglo-Saxon type of things. He, again, is a person who has a degree. Not to say a degree makes you super educated, but takes the time to study this stuff. Edith Thurger, William R. Short, starting to find these people that actually have decent credentials and that share their sources of where they get it from instead of just writing a book. I wrote a book, so I know my stuff. No, this is true because I researched this based upon this finding, or this is possibly true. This is becoming a more common trend where people are putting these disclaimers. Watch this channel called Pagan Coffee Talk. I'm also part of their Discord, another great group. And they recently had done this thing too, where they were talking about their topic for one of their lives that they had done was specifically mentioning disclaimers and if we should still do them. And how much of a disclaimer should we get in a video? Shouldn't it just be known at this point that people are sharing their own opinion? In my opinion, I feel like it is important to have disclaimers. Because even though it should be common sense at this point, people should be aware and realize that people share their own opinions and interpretations. I think people that are newer try to take things not at face value. They try to take it as fact or writ or doctrine when people share information or talk about stuff. And I don't know if that necessarily helps a lot or does much, I getting a message. Who's giving me a message right now? It says ... Okay, hold on. Hello, Blaze. Good to see you live again. I'm afraid I cannot contribute to the live discussion because YouTube has not let me use chat for about a year now. Not a problem. And if you are still watching, awesome. Take care and keep rocking. A library tour would be wonderful. Also keep in mind that the way people keep libraries can tell you a lot about their perks and habits if you know how to catch the details. True. This is true. And I think that's a good point. So I don't know if you're still here. I assume it might be Sword Sister. For whatever reason, Discord will cut off people's names every so often, and I'm not really sure why they do that. So it's not letting me see the person's full name. And it's driving me nuts because I want to know who I'm talking to. It'll come back eventually. Like, a lot of people's names start getting cut off. She has one letter with a ... on Discord. They're typing again, so we'll find out who it is. But yeah. No, I need to do a lot more. Yeah, it's me. No idea why Discord does that. I don't either. I thought it might have been you. Hopefully, YouTube will allow you to start chatting again in the main chat, which is fine. I mean, Discord's fine too. I always keep Discord open. But here, I will screenshot you and send you back. I don't know what it's showing, but that's what it's showing for me. So I wasn't really sure if it was you or not. So I assumed it was, but there we go. My assumption has been clarified. So yeah, I'll keep Discord open, so feel free to use that as a chat. I might even in the future start putting in my live section on my own server a chat section for doing lives. So if people want to participate in Discord, they can participate in Discord if they don't have a YouTube account, or they can participate in the YouTube live chat section too. So it's completely up to the viewer. So going through and trying to find out if people actually have credentials or not, or if they know what they're talking about, can sometimes be a trying and difficult task, very daunting task to go through. And I'm pacing myself. So one of the things that I've avoided doing is making more content because I'm not sure what to cover. You know, I don't want to necessarily throw out a video and ideas and try to explain, oh, this is how something is done, if I don't know the source or origin on it anymore. I'm literally starting to question everything that I've researched in the past. I started putting together, Sword Sister said, great idea and thank you. Absolutely. I started to put together a OneNote just so I have a digital copy. Like, I still have notebooks, spiral-bound notebooks when I was taking notes on this stuff when I was younger. People call these books of shadows. See, that's another example. I have no idea the origin of the term Book of Shadows. And Book of Shadows, as many of you know, and if you don't know, the way I understand it, see, there's my disclaimer. The way I understand it, based upon the general experiences I've had over the last 29 years, is a Book of Shadows is a magical journal where you take notes and put in spells and recipes for brews and incense and oil and just general notes on your spiritual journey. That's the purpose of a Book of Shadows. I just call it a journal, and I've got 3 or 4 of them because I've taken many notes throughout the years, and sometimes I'll get new ones. Like, I got a nice leather-bound black book that's blank with lines in it that I've used for several years, and I took all sorts of notes. And I'm not going to show people my book. It's my personal stuff, but I took notes on, like, elements and symbols associated with the elements and different herbs that I like, and I have put in prayers and different rituals and spells. So I put in stuff that means something to me. And even going back through them, like, for example, there's these elemental triangles, and there's one that represents each of the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, water. And these symbols are actually from alchemy. So if you look up alchemy symbols, you will find these exact triangles. So it was told to me through books, these symbols. I think it was books. I can't remember what book I found them in. And I guess that's the other problem when you talk about sources of materials and things. If you don't remember what your source is, I hit the microphone. That makes it difficult as well. That's one of the reasons I put together my OneNote. I have tabs now in my OneNote. Maybe I might share this one in the future, but I've got like this whole section, and it's like, well, I've got JavaScript and computer stuff that's completely unrelated, and Baldur's Gate 3 stuff. Okay. So then I have the section: Magic Research, Obod Bardic Grade, Celtic Irish, Scandinavian, Witchcraft, Dao, Martial Arts, Jinfa, Saga Adventure. Oh yeah, that's one of my games I'm making. Programming, Jake will. Okay, so most of this other stuff. So it's just this one section, I guess, specifically for the spiritual stuff: Magic Research, Obod Bardic, Celtic Irish, and Scandinavian, Witchcraft, and Dao. Those are the sections specific to spirituality. I got a lot of other sections I didn't even think about. Jake will, Baldur's Gate 3, D&D, all this other stuff, completely unrelated to the topic of this particular live. But in my magic research, I break down sections, and then I've got like rare books, and then I'm trying to go and collect these rare books. I've found some physical copies. I found some PDFs of some of these. So now I'm starting to find sources and origin and where some of these things came from, or at least an older source than the one that I read back in the 90s. Witchcraft, elements, yeah, the alchemy symbols right here. So blog.prepschool, here, I'll share this in the chat here. Hey, Jay Woodwolf, I actually just talked about you earlier, by the way. I gave a shout out to your channel too. Since I said I hadn't done a live in a while, I figured I'd jump on one. So that's one spot you can go to. It's certainly not the only one, but as you go through, you'll see the 4 classical elements. Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate you hanging out and supporting the channel and being a viewer for so many years. So I think that's important too. As we develop an online community, we give each other shout outs and we interact with each other's content when possible. I understand it's difficult to catch live sometimes. Emerald Tablet, Necronomicon, Amulets and Talismans, and then the Bardic Grade, I break it down in like festivals and each of the Guerci and notes I've had for doing each of the Guerci. The Celtic Irish stuff, I break it down into beings and terms. Irish Celtic, more reading sections so I can do first-hand accounts like Julius Caesar's The Gaelic Wars. Scandinavian stuff, I have like the Icelandic references, sagas, eddas that I want to read, and hyperlinks to translations of them. Terms, different days for the holidays, beings, weapons, and objects they had during that time, general timeline. So I'm starting to take all these notes down with references, because when I start as a content creator, I feel like I owe it to my viewers and my followers to provide them with as much detail and sources so that they can make up their own mind. I don't want people to feel like I did back in the 90s, where I'm just grasping at books and then I'm finding out some of these books are either inaccurate or repeating nonsense. And unfortunately, I think that was common. It really was, looking at a lot of these books. I remember this one time I was talking to my wife. She was getting into Hinduism. And we went to half-price books, try to get to the occult section, which we were already noticing was shrinking. And I saw a book on Kabbalah. And when I saw Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, and I'm like, I think this might be, I was like, I don't remember. I was like, I think this might be related to Hinduism stuff, I believe. And I was mistaken. And one person who was in the book section too jumped into our conversation, which I'm like, but they had a good point. They said it was Jewish mysticism. I'm like, it is? And of course, they're right. I've confirmed it later. The Kabbalah, specifically Jewish mysticism, the Tree of Life, the Sephiroth, all that is Jewish mysticism. And I'm actually surprised. Hello, John V. Welcome to the live. I'm surprised at how much of Jewish mysticism has bled into a lot of modern occult practices. But we never knew that. And that's the problem I have with a lot of the authors from the 90s. They didn't tell us this stuff, right? They didn't share with us that they were where they got their information from. As far as I can tell, and this, again, see, there's my disclaimer. I want to let you know if I have a source, cool, I'll share that source. And if I don't have a source, I want to let people know that too. I want to be like, I don't actually have a good, authentic source for this. So I'm just going to share what I have and what's available based upon what I remember. And I remember, my brain just stopped. Oh, yeah. So if I don't have a direct source to tell you, I want to tell you that. And I wish authors back in the 90s would have done the same thing. Because if they had given you their original sources, like if you're doing like a paper for school, you have to cite your sources. None of us know this stuff right away. Someone told it to us. And even if it's someone who had their parents tell it to them, which, let's face it, we're in the 2000s now. Some kids might have been raised to be New Age polytheistic. I think there might have even been some born in the early 1900s. But as far as I can tell, a lot of this New Age stuff, these New Age movement, and all of these, and I keep saying New Age, and that might trigger some people. Here's the thing. I think it's very important to realize that what people did in antiquity is not what people are doing today. What you are doing today, each and every one of us, myself and every viewer, and someone who's even interested in getting into it, you are doing something different. You are doing something new. And that is why I like to use the New Age classification. There are cultural things that are in antiquity, and you were only able to learn what your group around you knew. And the reason I would back up this claim that I'm making right now is if you think about the way that modern communication is. How do we get access to resources today? We look up online, we order offline, we get on forums and websites and YouTube channels. We get exposure to different ideas and paths just from the nature of modern technology. That wasn't a thing 2,000-3,000 years ago. Okay, so how are you going to get information? Well, let's look historically how information traveled back then. It traveled with merchants and traders, people who traveled and shared ideas. So, or individuals who traveled specifically to do it. So in Hinduism, you have someone called Thalmo. Thalmo is what they called him in Chinese. I'm trying to remember. Bodhidharma. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right because I don't know how to pronounce it, but I believe it's Bodhidharma. They called him Thalmo in China. But he traveled around sharing Buddhism with a whole bunch of different areas of the world. That's where we get Zen Buddhism, which is actually Japanese. A lot of people think that the Shaolin monks were Zen Buddhists. That's actually an inaccuracy. The Shaolin monks are Chan Buddhists. Chan Buddhism is the Chinese branch of Buddhism. But of course, it originated in India. So we have sources for sources. So when it's an old source, we're going to know where things came from. And like I said, in some cases, it's going to be this small footnote. Like, for example, in the Celtic type of stuff. So Celtic is a language group. There's not like the Celts. Like, there was a whole bunch of different tribes for the Celts. And there's different regions that spoke different languages, and they're all considered Celtic-speaking tribes. So the groups that we call Celtic, we don't know what their spirituality necessarily was because it was passed by word of mouth. So a lot of people are all like, oh, well, okay. What I'm doing is Celtic, Druid, and all that stuff. Well, Druid's actually more of a modern term, and if you look at etymology.com, again, there's my source. I don't know how accurate or authentic the source is, but it's one of the sources out there, and it's one of the ones that I have to go with because I don't know where the term Druid started from if I don't use etymology.com. And basically, they're saying it comes from a French word, and I believe it was the 15th century, if I remember correctly. You can look it up if you want. I don't feel like pulling it up this second. I guess I could. Maybe I should because we're talking about stuff specifically. And this is the problem, right? Either you have it memorized or you look up notes. And that's one of the things that I've been trying to do. Even before I started looking at sources, I tried to take notes of where things were coming from. I wanted to know what sources and origins were. So if we look up Druid etymology, and again, you couldn't really do this back in the 90s. You had to go find your book, flip through your book, take notes, use a highlighter, something like that. I wanted to make sure that it's okay. 16th century. See, I was wrong. So 1560 from the French druid or druid. I don't know how to speak French, but it's druid with an E on the end. Okay, it's the same way you spell it. And there could be older sources, but as far as I can tell, druid is not a Celtic word. None of the Celtic languages, even though French comes from one of the old Celtic dialects, I do not believe it would have directly come from it. Like even the old Irish form, DRUI. So like old Irish, again, there's Gaelic, there's Gaelga. And that's the thing. There's all these old language groups. My point is we call them Druids today. They didn't call themselves Druids necessarily. And we can find evidence and look some of this stuff up and find these sources. So looking at things like that, you have these people who are printing books on who the Druids were and how they practiced. What's your sources? What's your origins? So we have people like Iorlo Morganlug, which we know he forged some stuff. And I recently purchased his Bardos Volume 1 and 2 in a single volume from Amazon because I want to find some of these original sources. But Julius Caesar wrote the Gallic Wars. And Julius Caesar's writings on the Gallic Wars talks about his firsthand observations of the Druids. And people are going to be like, oh, but Julius Caesar's writing about them and they didn't like them, so they're not going to represent them properly. They didn't write their stuff down. So what else do you have to go on? And that's the thing people today, a lot of polytheists and pagans don't want to acknowledge and accept. They don't want to look at and say, we don't know. They want to instead make these outlandish claims with no way to back it up and then get in arguments when people tell them otherwise. And that's what I'm trying to move away from. I'm trying to look for, if I'm going to reference sources and repeat it, I want to know what those sources are. And if it's a modern source, fine. Fine. If you learn this from a modern source, just tell people that. I learned it because I talked to some idiot on YouTube who does lives on a random occasion that are unplanned. And he claims this, and this is one of the sources he gave me. Fine, then tell people that. If it's new, tell people that. My sister's brother's cousin's best friend told me that if you want to cleanse your house from evil negative spirits, you take quartz crystals and you put them in the corner of your room to repel the negative energy. Then tell people that. It's hearsay. Then let them know that. It's fine. And people make these claims, oh, well, hearsay and heritage and word of mouth, that's a way of passing stuff. Yes, it absolutely is. But you also got to realize it changes with the person's perspective and view. If you learn something like a recipe on how to cook from one of your grandparents, right? Or maybe you learned it from your mother learned it from your grandparents. You pass it down. Each generation adds their own thing. Maybe they don't have access to the same ingredients. Maybe they have different tastes. Same thing is true of spirituality in any cultural tradition. So when I say New Age, I'm not trying to belittle or discredit. I'm trying to acknowledge that what we are doing today is an adaptation from the past. And according to some of these firsthand accounts, what people used to do in these regions that people are trying to reconstruct I call it New Age and Reconstruction because we're rebuilding things based upon what little is left. These reconstructions are from areas in the world that historically we know for a fact they did practices we would not want to do today at all. And it's okay to acknowledge that. Irish, Druith, plural, Droy. I don't know how to pronounce that. J. Wolf. Droicht. Right. So again, they wouldn't have called themselves Druids. It's what we call them today. Pagan Coffee Talk, what's up? I gave you a shout out today too, actually. I was mentioning you had recently talked about disclaimers and if we should use them in one of your lives, and I was actually talking about that. So good to see you. Good to see you. Jay Woodwolf, Modern Irish. Oh, it's Modern Irish. I know very, very little Modern Irish, which means I would have to look up the pronunciation on that since I don't speak it. I know like one or two words that are kind of fun, and some names and how to pronounce them. Like Siobhan, even though it looks like Siobhan, or how to say Ihahauna, which is the Irish word for Halloween. And Ihahauna basically means the eve of Samhain. Samhain is an Irish word as well. It's actually the Irish word for the month of November. And a lot of people think that Samhain is on October 31st. It's not. 31st of October is Ihahauna. But I had to look up how to pronounce those. I didn't know how to do it either. Driocht. Okay, so I was kind of close-ish on that. Thank you. Driocht. Yeah. And again, it depends on, which area you're talking about. Like, we try to summarize everything today as Druid in one area. Like, all Druids, they're all Druids. It's like each clan and tribe would have done it mildly differently. Think about the modern monotheist, right? So monotheism is pretty prevalent in a lot of modern countries today. United States, one of the major religions, actually most of the major religions in the United States are the Abrahamic religions, most of them. And I would argue, based upon online census information, I think we're somewhere in the ballpark of at least 70% of the people who claim they're part of one of the Abrahamic faiths. Now, tell me they all practice the same. I guarantee you won't be able to say that with a straight face, or you'll be lying to yourself, because we have tons of different denominations. And even within the same denomination, you have people who argue over it from church to church, practitioner to practitioner, individual to individual. So if by human nature we make things our own and manipulate and change things, why are we trying to, as a New Age Reconstruction community, trying to dictate or try to formalize what people are doing? And I've mentioned this before too. If you are learning from a specific group, so in modern New Age heathenry, you have what's called a hof, which is a temple. It's an Icelandic word, it means temple. And I think there's something close to it in Swedish and Danish as well. But hof, if you're not learning from a hof, specific temple, specific group, some people call it a kindred. I don't know where the term kindred comes from. I don't know that one off the top of my head. I've heard it applied to different things, like in fantasy for vampires. So you're kind, basically. So, but anyway, kindred is what some of the people say in some of the heathen revival reconstruction communities to refer to groups of individuals who collectively practice together. So if you're not learning from a kindred or a hof, then you're doing your own thing. If you are a witch, if you are not learning from a coven, and you're not doing the coven traditions, you are doing your own thing. And there will be variances from coven to coven. Just like solitary practitioners, there's going to be variances. If you talk about the Druidry stuff, they will typically call it either a grove or in some cases a seed group, depending on the tradition that you're going with. And if you're not learning, again, from a grove, a coven, a hof, you are doing your own thing. So don't try to listen to others who try to dictate practices to you, because they're just sharing with you their take, their opinion, and their view on how to do it. Well, first part is Dri, so Driocht. Okay. So Dri would be an individual, and what's Driocht? Because you have Irish. Got a couple things in there. Nementon or grove? Is Nementon another word for grove? That was actually one interesting thing that I had noticed a lot is some of the writings from Adam of Bremen, again, sources, mentions groves when he's talking about some of the Scandinavian stuff. And then you have others, I think it was Adam of Bremen who was talking about groves. I don't think he was talking about druids. Yeah. From Uppsala, Adam of Bremen was talking about how they had groves that they practiced in. And we know that the Scandinavians actually settled in Ireland. In fact, we know that Dublin is a Viking settlement. So we have information that shows there's some similarities. So today, a lot of modern folks, for some reason today when people say pagan, a lot of people are talking about heathenry. Now they're calling it Norse paganism, but they're blending in a lot of the Celtic stuff, which is very popular back in the 90s. So back in the 90s, everyone was a witch or a Wiccan. That was the big two things. Now it's Norse pagan. And I blame the TV show Vikings. People got interested in it because they saw a TV show or played a game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And they're like, oh, I want to be like that. So now people are adapting. And it's, you know, it doesn't matter why you got interested or into things. I'm not trying to belittle that. But it is the big boom now where everyone's using this name. And again, they're now blending and they don't know where this stuff originated from. And I guess the question then is, do you care where it originated from? Or do you just want to talk about what modern people are doing? But if you just talk about what modern people are doing, then you run into the problem of each individual does it their own way. And now there's infighting because you have some people that are going with authenticity from historical sources. And then you have other people that are just doing what everyone else is doing because it's popular. Wheel of the Year has nothing to do with Norse paganism. Yet most Norse pagans will use it anyway. If maybe I shouldn't say it has nothing to do with Norse paganism. It has nothing to do with the sources that Norse paganism pulls from because those people followed a lunar calendar, not a solar calendar. Nemeton. Yeah. Okay, so Nemeton is another name for a grove. Which language is that? Is that Welsh or is that Irish? Driocht is the practice of druids. Okay. So Drioth, Dree, and then Driocht. I gotcha. That's kind of cool. I'm glad you know that, Jay Woodwolf. I do not know that, and that would be information that I would probably take notes on in my journal. And of course, I would ask you for sources and references because that's how my mind works. And when I ask people for sources and references, I'm not trying to belittle people. I'm trying to understand. I don't like repeating information without knowing where it came from. And if I do, I always disclaimer it. Always. Because it just doesn't feel right to share something without knowing where it came from. There is a reason Norse may be more popular than Celtic. It could be Christianity may have taken longer to reach those regions. I don't know for sure because I'm not sure when the conversions happened for a lot of the Celtic groups. I do know that what is considered to be Norse, because that is, again, a modern term, they didn't call themselves Norse. Norse originally referred specifically to people from Norway, Norwegian specifically. Norsemen, they were Norwegians. The Danish and the Swedish were not originally considered Norse. Now, we call them all Norse today. We talk about the Scandinavian region when we're talking about Norse. I know that their conversion, so we're talking about, again, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, and then technically Iceland and Greenland, too, even though those are settlements. They're still classified in that group with the Norse. I believe the end of what we call the Viking era was, 1122? Let me check my timeline. Again, check your notes if you don't have it memorized. I think it was 1122 was the end of the Viking era. And we had about 200 years where things weren't written down, and 200 years later we had things written down. General timeline. So, 1020 Norway converted, and then 1066 Sweden converted. So it would be 1066 would be the end of the Viking era. So So, according to this one timeline, based upon a YouTube creator who put together some pieces from a couple books that I actually have as well, he claims the origins of Germanic paganism to be old enough to be 10,000 BCE. I don't buy that one. 500 BCE was the Iron Age. That one we can look it up and prove. And then he said 200 CE, Norse paganism split based upon the writings of Tacitus's Germania, which is a book. Again, we can reference that. So typically around 200 CE is when we consider the break off of the Norse based upon the writings of this one author. So okay, I'll give him that. 476 CE, Rome falls and the Dark Ages start. Again, we can look that up and confirm that. 793 CE is the raiding of Lindisfarne, which some people, including the one person I mentioned earlier, historical heathen, considers the Viking Age to have begun before that. It's just most people consider the raiding of Lindisfarne from when they start counting. And this would, of course, be based upon numerous historians and historical sources. 900 CE, Denmark converts to Christianity. 1000 CE, Iceland converts to Christianity, which had a very interesting conversion because I actually know a lot about that one. I looked it up. 1020, Norway converts, and then 1066, Sweden converts. And then 200 years before basically the religion's dead and gone for the most part, besides for the cultural traditions that survived. And it wasn't until 1270 that a skald by the name of Snorri Sturluson in Iceland started writing down the Poetic Edda. And then in the 1800s, they started to romanticize the era, and they started to have a new interest in the old faith. So almost 800 years later, and I don't know about you, man, but even 100 years, things get skewed, let alone 800, which is one of the problems that I have with a lot of the Reconstruction stuff is people are going off of hearsay, and you didn't have as much resources available to you back in the day. That's why people like Yolo Morganlug made things up. When did Ireland convert to Christianity? Again, online searches, right? The early Christian period in Ireland was around 400 to 800. So yeah, that's a couple hundred years before the Scandinavian stuff with Ireland. Okay, let's go with England. When did England convert to... Actually, I guess they would have been the ones who converted first, wouldn't they have? Because they are the ones who spread a lot of it. Spanning the 7th century was essentially the results of Gregorian mission of 597. In 314, so we're already talking about the 300s, so that's definitely before Ireland. Wales. When did Wales convert? Probably similar time period, right? The Welsh revival. No, that doesn't count. 500 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Christianity of Wales and its own marked characteristics. So at least in 500, we were at least talking about Christians in Wales as well. So yeah. What about France? History of the Catholic Church in France, founded in 910. The founding of the church is even... So basically, if I'm looking at this correctly, looks like England and Wales was like in the pre-500 CE, and then France, and then Ireland, and then you started to talk about some of the Scandinavian stuff. So maybe that is a good point that you bring up, Pagan Coffee Talk. I'm not sure. This is just some random quick online searches on DuckDuckGo there. That's not really an in-depth search, so I will look into it more later because I'm actually kind of interested now. I'm kind of curious. There's a lot of practices lost to give to time. Yes, lost to time. But the Norse mythology has been held together better than Celtic mythology. That's more to where I was speaking. Maybe. The reason I would say that is it seems like... See, I don't know all of the sources for some of the Celtic stuff. We have a lot of Irish tales. Welsh, especially Welsh. We have tons of Welsh tales. We have Irish and Welsh tales that were written down. So we have a couple different countries that wrote down sources. And we have some old writings on some of it. All of this, of course, was afterwards and was written down by Christian monks and whatnot. But We do have, with Scandinavia, it's most of the stuff that people reference. Now, there are things outside of it, but Iceland pretty much shuts everything down. So you have one country where most of those sources come from. So I don't know if I would agree that it's been held together a little bit better. Got to be careful with history, tends to be revisionist. Yes, yes. And that's the other kind of point that I'm bringing up. That's why I've tried to embrace, for my personal path, it's a spiritual path. I'm doing my own thing. I'm taking inspiration from writings of others, but I'm doing my own thing now. For me, it's not about religion anymore. I want to move away from religion because religion is doctrines and dogmas dictated by others. And I don't want to buy into anyone's religion. I want to make and forge my own path with my own purposes in mind, which is a connection and reverence for life and finding my place within it. So, at least today, that's how I feel about it. I'm human. I can change my mind. So, it's just one of those things. But I do think it's important, at the very least, to find purpose and meaning behind practices. And if you were going to do a practice, at least tap into why are you doing it and where did it come from. But I think we find this in anyone of any faith or religion. Like if we look at Christianity, a lot of them just do things because that's what their parents did or their church told them to do. They don't think about the why. They don't care about the why. They don't care about the history. They don't care about the origin. They just do their thing. Now, that's not everyone. Everyone's a unique individual. But it seems to be a common trend from what I can tell. The average person just does things because that's what their culture does. Oh, the Scottish had been Anglo-Saxon Pict. Celtic. Scottish is a bit convoluted with the Pictish. The Scotland had been Anglo-Saxon Pict. All because they go back and forth to who claimed that area and territory and land. So you see some intermingling of various cultures. Right. And that's fair. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's like local groups, right? They adapted and did what they wanted to do, and they just kind of moved forward. And if you weren't introduced to a new way of thinking or believing, you just did what your local towns, cities, and family and neighbors did. You don't really do a whole bunch of other stuff, right? You just do what you're currently has in front of you. That's not the case today. Today, if you don't like something, you can go up online and find something else that you do like. And it's makes sense that things in popular media are becoming popular spiritually because it's what people are introduced to. If everyone's talking about it, then everyone wants to do it because it's in front of them. It's hard to separate from the mix. It can be. It can be. I don't know. I definitely feel like, though, over the last 29 years, I've accumulated a large amount of fluff. And I want to weed through that. I can't remember who asked me for the library tour. I'm going to need to find out who that is. I wonder if I could do... Sometimes you'll get emailed to your Gmail when there's comments that are posted. Library tour. Ah, here it is. Swamp Fox. Would you consider doing book reviews or just a library tour in general? Would love to see what books you have. And this is from a while ago, just a channel update, and I posted this in 2022, so it wasn't that long ago. So okay, so we'll do a library tour for Swamp Fox at some point. You should write a book. I appreciate that. I actually considered doing that a couple of times, and I've had other people make that suggestion as well. I might. My biggest problem is I tend to be more articulate than I am at being good at writing, so my writing skills are lacking a little bit. But I might consider doing that. I took a page out of Pagan Coffee Talk's book with the video playing in the background. I saw your last one that you did, Pagan Coffee Talk, where I believe 2 of you were talking and you had just video scenery stuff playing in the background. Like, that's not a bad idea if I don't want to be on camera right now. So, ta-da! Borrowing your idea. So, shout out to you for that. So, I just took some random footage I had that I had done with my phone that I thought was interesting. That might be kind of fun. So, this is right now when I was at the Viking exhibit at the museum, and that's one of the longest boats that they have found. And then the little information about the boat and what's it called. And that's me walking, holding the camera while I talk about it. And yeah, there you go. That's what it's called, the name of it. You didn't see it very long. And there's another boat off in the corner, which I thought was cool. Here's just a deer I saw when I was at the park. It let me get within 5 feet of it, so I thought it was pretty cool, so I decided to record. So, yeah, I just had some different footage I figured I'd throw up for fun. But I might put a book together. I had started one. I never finished it, and I think I need to constantly change it. Blaze, Cauldron Brew, Pagan Coffee Talk have developed a network. Right. I mean, the 3 of us seem to support each other a lot. We talk in Discord. We try to jump in each other's lives when possible. I can't always catch your guys' lives because of when you end up doing them. But when I have the ability to, I do try to go back and watch and like your channel and stuff. So, would like to do that more. Play it in the background sometimes when I'm working. But I think it's good. I think it's good to talk to other people in the community to get different perspective. Because again, we're only going to do and know what we like based upon our interactions with others and how it's introduced to us. So having a strong community of constantly questioning and sharing benefits everyone in that community, in my opinion. So I appreciate it. Network. We should do the networking. But it looks like I'm approaching my 1 hour, which I want to try to keep under. So since we're hitting that hour mark, I'm going to wrap up the live for today. Really appreciate everyone swinging in, hanging out for a little bit, and chatting in the chat. Maybe I will start planning these again. I do want to go back to planning them. I don't know. As I'd said towards the beginning of this particular live, I'm finding difficulty finding topics to do videos on. And I do like the lives because of interacting with the chat, answering questions, asking questions, and, you know, whatnot. I feel that is enjoyable, and it doesn't take time. I literally turn it on and just start talking. So that's easier to do than putting a video together and editing it and splicing content and cleaning up audio and all this other type of stuff. And then it's like, what topic do I talk about? Like, you know, it's like I'm starting to question my sources. It's like I want to do authentic stuff, and I don't even know if I buy into some of the things that I've read back in the past. I'm in the process of questioning everything right now. So I don't really know what to focus on. I had thought in the past of doing videos relating to warding or cleansing or healing, but it's like people have done videos like that before. So what makes my video so special? Who wants to listen to me and how I interpret doing spiritual healing and the different names that I would classify it as, and rules associated with using healing energy, and how you should ask for permission on things first, and you know, things like that. It's like, I don't know who would all be interested in things like this. So I have not done those videos yet. Although I do have I at least have something on my list to consider, and that's the tour of the book collection I have. I probably should call it a book collection over a library. I just like calling it a library. It makes me feel special. It's my library. I got 2 bookshelves. It's my library. Hey, Grasslands G. Welcome, man. My foggy brain could only lurk and listen today. Thanks for this. I woke up thinking Blaze hasn't done a live in a while. Apparently, it was destined to happen today because both you and Jay Woodwolf had this idea. Now, Jay messaged me on Discord. So yeah, I hadn't. I apologize for being away. I was trying to be more active on my channel, and then I just let it slip. I think my last video on meditation got 34 views, and I think I got a little jaded, and I'm like, man, I just went into great detail about meditation, something that I'm pretty passionate about, and I've actually had training in from a martial arts instructor. A couple martial arts instructors have taught me different meditation techniques, learned different meditation techniques during my healing classes that I had done at the Four Winds Trade Academy, and I figured that'd be a great topic. No, one wants to watch it. I'm just like, well, fine, I won't talk then. I'll act like a 3-year-old and stomp my feet and get agitated. But yeah, no, I need to get back to it. I've also been distracted because I've been deep cleaning my room. I have an office with all my books and stuff and where my computer is that I'm sitting in right now. And I went and cleaned and dusted everything in great detail, got every nook and cranny. It looks gorgeous, but it took me about 6 days of deep cleaning to really, really get the place cleaned up, which I wanted to do before I did a book tour of what I own. Blaze, when you first ended up in Pagan Coffee Talk Discord server, I had to ask Oswin, is that Blazely Dragon from YouTube? He was like, yeah, the same Blazely Dragon. Aw, thanks, man. That makes me feel special. Knowing that I was already known, I had one incident like that in TikTok, actually. I had one person, when I started doing TikTok, I had face covering. Like, I was wearing a mask because I just, like, it's a goofy kids app, right? And I was like, I'll do a couple videos. And then one person said, wait a minute, did you used to go by Blazely Dragon on YouTube like 13 years ago? And I took off the mask for the next video. I'm like, well, actually, yeah, I guess the mask doesn't help. There's no reason to wear it since I'm recognized even with it. So it's kind of cool when that happens. So I really appreciate you pointing that out. I had a moment of fangirl. Nothing wrong with that. I remember you mentioning, you said you've been watching my channel for a while. So it's always good to meet other individuals who appreciate the content I'm putting out there, because that's why I'm posting it, right? I mean, I could just have private conversations off to the side, but if we have these conversations in public and share information and resources, I think it's beneficial. And then when that information is appreciated, it encourages content creators like myself and yourself, as well as Pagan Coffee Talk, to continue to make content. When people want that, you produce more of it. When people don't want it, it feels like a waste of time. So thank you for making it not feel like it's been a waste of time. I appreciate it. Okie dokie then. I'm going to call it here. We're past the 1 hour mark. Thank you again. Thank you one and all. Grasslands G, good to see you. Sword Sister, good to see you. John V, Jay Woodwolf, Pagan Coffee Talk. Did I miss anyone? Nope, those are all the only people who chatted today. So thank you all. Have a great one, and I will catch you in the next one.